Welcome to Paskvan Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Today we're opening a stack of sources on, well, one of the most chilling and really enduring mysteries from the Cold War. It's the enigma of the woman found lifeless in Norway's Valley of Death back in 1970. Our goal here is to try and piece together the life that, it seems, she tried incredibly hard to erase. We'll be following this really intricate trail of false names, coded journals, and just meticulous deception she left behind. We're going to explore, really, the vanishing point of a human life and maybe the geopolitical forces that demanded her total anonymity.
And this particular investigation is just a crucial study. It shows how a single, seemingly isolated event, in a quiet Scandinavian valley can tie directly into global geopolitics, the shadow wars. We'll be looking at the profound paradoxes around her demise and this elaborate network of secrecy she built around herself. And crucially, I think we have to recognize that every detail she left behind seems like it was either a carefully engineered mask or perhaps a deliberate piece of misdirection, all aimed at making sure her true identity just never surfaced.
All right, and for you listening, we're going to guide you through that initial really shocking discovery and the clues, the immediate clues that suggested this was never just a sad story about a lost hiker. No, this was a narrative layered with professional preparation and potentially some very deadly consequences. So we need to begin where the case itself began, at the scene in the Isdal Valley.
Okay, let's set the scene. November 29th, 1970, outside Bergen, Norway. It's a rugged landscape, beautiful but harsh, steep, often rain-slicked rock faces, dense vegetation. Locals call it Isdalen, the Ice Valley. But historically, it had this older, much more ominous nickname because of past incidents, disappearances. Didsdalen, the Valley of Death.
And that name certainly felt appropriate on that cold Sunday. The discovery itself. It was made by a father out hiking with his two young daughters. Just a casual hike, but they were off the main path, weren't they?
Yeah.
Navigating this rocky slope when they saw something out of place.
Yeah, initially they thought maybe it was just, the remains of a small fire, or maybe some campers had left charred debris behind. But the sheer isolation of the spot, that should have been the first clue. It wasn't a place people typically camped or stopped.
And as they got closer,
the horror became clear. It was the body of a woman, positioned awkwardly, almost strangely, on this rocky decline, completely isolated, and she was mostly consumed by fire. This scene, right from the start, presented these immediate contradictions that would just baffle Norwegian investigators for, decades.
Okay, walk us through the state of the body, because this is really where the professional nature of this effort, this erasure, seems to begin.
Right. She was severely burned. The sources mention her clothing was actually fused to her skin in places. Her hair completely singed away. Her posture was described as unnatural, her fingers clenched really tight, like frozen mid-motion. But here's the first major conflict, the first real puzzle. While her upper body was heavily damaged by the fire, her feet, which were still inside her shoes, they were completely untouched by the flames.
Completely untouched. And the ground directly beneath the body, that's the detail that just screams staging, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The forensic team specifically noted that the rock and the vegetation immediately under her showed no scorching at all. Now think about it. If a fire intense enough to burn a body that severely had been burning there for any length of time, the ground beneath should have been blackened, permanently marked.
So what does that suggest?
It strongly suggests one of two things. Either the fire was incredibly controlled, maybe using a very potent chemical accelerant that burned hot and fast but didn't spread much downwards, or
the body was moved.
Or the body might have been moved after the severe burning took place somewhere else entirely.
Okay, and nearby, investigators found this collection of really strange items.
Deeply strange. There were shards of smashed liqueur bottles, fragments of melted plastic, bits of half-burned paper, and these partly dissolved pills scattered in the ashes.
The smashed bottles. What did they make of those? Just dropped?
No, not just dropped. The sources say they were deliberately shattered. Pulverized almost, like someone took effort to break them into tiny pieces. It was a specific kind of liqueur, by the way. And the pieces of paper, burned so thoroughly they were completely unreadable. This wasn't carelessness. This looks like a cleanup effort, a deliberate attempt to destroy any evidence.
Destroy evidence of what she'd consumed, maybe what documents she carried, even what kind of accelerant might have been used for the fire.
Exactly. This wasn't just leaving things behind. It was actively destroying potential clues.
Then there's the jewelry. This detail always felt almost theatrical to me. A few pieces found carefully placed beside the body, not on her.
Right. Arranged almost, like a strange sort of tribute or maybe an identifier, but there was no purse, no wallet, no ID, definitely no passport.
So why arrange the jewelry like that?
Well, that's highly debated. If this was a rushed, desperate act of self-harm, why take the time, the care, to arrange items next to the body? It doesn't fit. Some investigators thought maybe it was ritualistic, a final message. Others see it quite differently.
As a distraction.
As a deliberate distraction. A non-identifying clue left behind designed to occupy police resources, maybe send them down the wrong path, while the real reason for her presence in Norway remained hidden.
And connecting back to this core idea of total anonymity, the sources are very clear on the first sign of that intentional erasure.
That's right, and it's unmistakable. Every single piece of fabric on her body, any remaining clothing, had been meticulously searched. And every tag, every label, every manufacturer's mark, even the little laundry loops, precisely cut out.
Wow.
This level of obsessive concealment, it's the first undeniable sign that this person's anonymity was the absolute top priority, even, it seems, above the act of passing away itself.
This immediately elevated the whole thing, didn't it? From just a local tragedy
to potentially an international incident, absolutely.
Okay, let's turn to the medical analysis then. The scene initially might suggest, a desperate plan, self-inflicted act.
Yeah.
The pills, the fire. But the forensics immediately complicated that story, spinning it towards something else entirely.
Yeah, the transition from the scene in the valley to the medical examiner's lab really revealed the depth of the paradox here. The autopsy confirmed she had ingested a substantial amount of phenobarbital. It's a potent barbiturate, very common back then, used as a sedative or anti-epileptic. And we're not talking a few pills. The report says over 50 sleeping pills were found in her stomach. That quantity is undeniably lethal.
50 pills. That's not an accidental overdose. That's a committed effort to end things using chemicals. But, and this is the critical twist, the official cause of her passing wasn't the overdose.
It is the absolute pivot point of the entire investigation. The official cause was listed as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and burns. Meaning she was actively breathing when the fire started. The CO, the carbon monoxide in her bloodstream, proves she inhaled smoke.
Okay.
If she had already succumbed just to the barbiturates, she would have been unconscious, likely stopped breathing before the fire could have produced that level of CO poisoning.
So she had this lethal dose of pills inside her, but she didn't actually pass away from them. That implies either she was forced to take them but was still conscious, or maybe the time between taking the pills and the fire starting was extremely short.
Precisely. It creates this conflict. If she was attempting a quiet end with pills, why the incredibly violent fire? If she was burned specifically to obscure her identity, why the massive lethal dose of barbiturates beforehand? The two methods seem almost contradictory unless they were used together. Perhaps to incapacitate her before the final act of erasure, or maybe to ensure there was absolutely no chance of resistance if this act was forced upon her.
The ultimate act of concealment. The detail that really sets this case apart from almost any other was the condition of her hands.
This is the detail that just screams professional tradecraft intelligence work. Both of her hands were rubbed raw. The skin, the sources say, had been meticulously sanded down. A clear, deliberate attempt to obliterate her fingerprints.
Sanded down? How would someone even do that effectively, especially to themselves? It must have been excruciating.
The investigators determined it was a highly focused, conscious effort. It wasn't accidental abrasion. They speculated it was done either with an abrasive material, maybe like pumice stone, or perhaps even a corrosive chemical agent followed by rubbing. It speaks not to panic, but to cold, calculated planning. If she did this to herself, she was actively fighting through immense pain to ensure her fingerprints could never be used to trace her history.
And if someone else did it?
Then it was a cold-blooded process of post-mortem identity destruction, a final, brutal step in the erasure. Remember, in 1970, fingerprints were the absolute gold standard for identification.
This level of effort to prevent identification is just astonishing, especially when you combine it with the staging of the scene, the jewelry, the location. It leaves us with these profound questions. If she simply intended to end her own life anonymously, why the elaborate staging of the jewelry? Why endure the immense pain to sand her hands, suggesting this professional effort to hide identity if the goal was just obscurity?
Yeah, it really forces you towards the conclusion that we're looking not just at a solitary ending, but at the systematic erasure of a person's existence. The fire seems like it was the accelerant for anonymity, and the sanded hands were the final, deliberate act of scrubbing her identity from history. The body itself was almost like like a corrupted piece of evidence designed specifically to stop the investigation cold.
And it nearly did. The case was completely blocked, right? Just this burned body of these contradictory forensics. Until several days later, a huge break came.
That's right. A large suitcase was discovered. It was in a storage locker at the Bergen railway station. The claim tag had been torn off, and the lock itself had been violently forced open.
And the contents. This wasn't your average tourist luggage.
Not even close. The contents immediately suggested she was not an ordinary traveler. This was someone living a highly specialized, probably dangerous life. Constant deception, constant movement, maybe a professional courier, an operative, an agent of some kind.
Let's detail the contents because it really reads like a toolkit for professional disguise.
Okay, so there were multiple wigs. Different lengths, different colors, blonde, brunette, various styles. This suggests a routine need and ability to change her physical appearance quickly and completely.
Not just for fun.
No, this looked professional. And alongside the wigs, theatrical-style makeup kits. Heavy coverage. Stuff meant for professional disguise, not just everyday cosmetic use.
And critically, this suitcase confirmed the erasing effort wasn't just something that happened at the end in Isdal.
Exactly. All the clothing inside the suitcase also had the labels meticulously cut out. Every single piece. This wasn't an act performed on her final day out of desperation. This was her standard operating procedure.
She was permanently committed to being untraceable, not just in death, but in life.
Mm-hmm. There was one item, though, that kind of inadvertently left a potential clue. It was a prescription tube for eczema cream.
Ah, with a name on it.
Yeah, labeled with a name. Fenella Lorch. Police investigated, of course, but quickly determined this was just another false identity. No real Fenella Lorch connected to the case could be found.
But the really transformative discovery inside that suitcase, that was the notebook.
Yes, a small notebook, tucked away. Inside, just neat lines of seemingly meaningless numbers and letters marching down the pages. This turned out to be the key that unlocked her movements, at least partially.
Investigators managed to crack the code.
Partially, yes. They realized the entries corresponded to dates and cities across Europe. It used a relatively simple but still effective substitution cipher. For instance, an entry like O220 was interpreted as Oslo, 22nd of October. F11H, they figured out, meant Hamburg, 11th of November.
So this log confirmed she was traveling extensively and precisely.
Absolutely. It showed calculated movement, mostly using trains, staying in hotels across Norway, but also Paris, Hamburg, in the months leading up to her passing. This wasn't random wandering, it was highly structured travel, often very short stays, just a day or two before moving rapidly on again.
What about the parts of the code they couldn't crack? Or entries that didn't match known travel?
That's also significant. Some notations in the notebook remain opaque even today. They don't seem to correspond to known hotel stays or train journeys. This suggests maybe hidden meetings, dead drops perhaps, or other activities that were never officially logged anywhere. It implies this layered level of operation. You have the false public identity recorded by hotels, and then these secret activities logged only in her personal cipher.
Following the trail from the decoded entries, the hotel registrations, investigators documented at least 8 false identities she used across Europe.
8 confirmed aliases. Names like Genevieve Lancier, Claudia Tielt, Vera Schlosseneck. And crucially, in every single instance she checked into these hotels, she presented a genuine-looking passport. But again, none of those passports were ever recovered. Not at the scene and not in the suitcase.
What did the hotel staff remember about her? Did they build up a picture?
They did build a coherent picture, though she clearly kept her distance. She always checked in looking polished, very international in her appearance, spoke fluent German or French, apparently. But she seemed guarded, profoundly wary. Staff often described her as watching the lobby, sort of monitoring who was coming and going, behaving less like a relaxed tourist and more like someone who was expecting someone, or perhaps monitoring someone else.
And then there were those peculiar operational requests she made.
Yes, this is very telling. She frequently asked for extra room cleaning, sometimes more than once a day.
Why would someone do that? What are the operational implications?
Well, it speaks directly to a need for operational security, what's known in the intelligence world as tradecraft. If she was conducting sensitive meetings in her room, maybe exchanging documents or packages, perhaps even developing film or handling sensitive materials, she would need the area sanitized immediately afterwards.
To ensure no trace evidence was left behind.
Exactly. Nothing that could be found by hotel staff later, or, more importantly, by opposing agents who might try to surveil her room after she checked out. It suggests a life lived under constant threat of exposure.
Okay, here's where all these disparate pieces The aliases, the codes, the constant movement, the professional erasure start to click into a much larger global framework. When you connect all that to the specific place and time, Norway, 1970, the pattern shifts dramatically. It moves away from just crime towards geopolitics.
We absolutely must remember the intense strategic significance of Norway at that precise moment in history. It wasn't some quiet, neutral backwater. It was the crucial northern flank of NATO.
Directly bordering the Soviet Union.
Directly bordering the Soviet Union, which made it a vital front line in the Cold War, a place where intelligence activity from both sides was absolutely rampant, constant probing, constant surveillance.
And Bergen specifically, where she was found, wasn't just any city. It was a major strategic hub.
A huge hub. It hosted NATO naval bases, major radar installations. It was a key point for monitoring Soviet submarine activity out in the North Atlantic. There was even sensitive missile testing happening nearby.
Can you elaborate a bit on why intelligence organizations would focus so intensely on this particular region back then?
Sure. In the 60s and 70s, the submarine threat from the Soviet Northern Fleet was paramount for NATO. The North Atlantic, that stretch of water between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, the GI-UK gap, was essentially the Soviet Navy's main gateway to the open ocean. NATO had installed these incredibly sophisticated underwater listening systems, like the sound surveillance system, sonar, along the Norwegian coastline, specifically to track Soviet submarine movements.
So anyone conducting surveillance against those NATO systems, or perhaps even sabotage operations,
would be an extremely high-priority agent for either side. And Bergen, with its port facilities, its proximity to these naval bases and listening posts, was a perfect operational staging point for that kind of activity.
The items we found in her suitcase, the wigs, the non-prescription glasses, which you mentioned, are often used just to alter facial profiles. The multiple passports, the coded logs, the meticulous identity erasure, these are all textic hallmarks of high-level intelligence operatives, aren't they? Define tradecraft for us in this specific context.
Right. Tradecraft refers to these specialized methods and techniques used by intelligence agents to conduct their missions without being detected. It covers everything. Maintaining your cover story, communicating secretly using codes or dead drops, conducting surveillance without being spotted, and, critically, operational security like asking for frequent room cleaning. The woman's actions, the multiple identities, the quick changes in appearance, the cipher notebook, the meticulous destruction of identifying evidence like clothing tags and fingerprints, all of this points to rigorous training and strict adherence to tradecraft protocols. Protocols designed to protect herself, yes, but maybe more importantly, to protect the network she belonged to.
Which brings us to the chilling implication of her demise, whether she was working for NATO or for the Soviet Union, or maybe even as a compromised double agent. Her calculated, staged passing and the total erasure of her identity point very strongly toward a professional neutralization.
Yeah, neutralization in this context is a sort of clinical term used in intelligence circles. It refers to the permanent removal of an agent from operation, usually lethally. If she was compromised, if she was about to be caught or had already been turned, she represented a grave risk to her entire network, her handlers, her contacts, her methods.
So her own organization might have.
Her own organization might have orchestrated her ending to ensure she couldn't be interrogated and reveal sensitive information, assets, routes, future plans. It's a brutal calculation, but common in that world.
Or the opposing side.
Or, conversely, an opposing intelligence service might have eliminated her. Perhaps after she had served their purpose, maybe after extracting information from her, or simply to silence her permanently. And then they staged the scene to look like a deliberate anonymous act, pointing fingers away from themselves.
This leads to maybe the most haunting aspect of the Isdal Woman case, the unclaimed life. The fact that absolutely no one, no family member, no friend, and critically, no embassy from any country ever came forward to claim her body or inquire about her.
That silence is perhaps the loudest testimony we have. Think about it. An unidentified foreign national found deceased under suspicious circumstances in a NATO country in 1970. Embassies would certainly have been notified, especially given the potential passport links.
But nothing came of it.
Nothing. The lack of any official inquiry from any government strongly suggests she was operating completely outside of sovereign protection. Or, perhaps more chillingly, that the sovereignty that should have protected her deliberately chose to remain silent to avoid exposure of their own operations.
She was a woman who lives without an official past.
And ultimately, it seems, she was intended to pass away without leaving a name. The institutional silence surrounding her existence speaks volumes about the potential level of deep geopolitical involvement.
So we have this powerful evidence pointing towards secrecy, professional tradecraft, the Cold War context. But still, after all this time, no definitive name, no organization has ever claimed her or been definitively linked. This agonizing ambiguity has fueled several theories over the decades.
It has. And we should recognize the deliberate nature of the preservation effort by the Norwegian authorities themselves. The fact that she was buried in a zinc-lined coffin in Bergen. That's a critical point.
Why zinc-lined?
Zinc coffins are used specifically to protect remains from decay and water damage over long periods. It signals that the authorities, even back then, expected, or maybe even hoped, that this mystery would eventually resurface, that future technology might one day offer answers they couldn't get in 1970.
Okay, let's touch on the main theories. The first one, the conclusion the Norwegian police initially, perhaps reluctantly, settled on. The staged self-inflicted act.
Right. This theory tried to somehow integrate the pills in the fire as a final, tragic act of someone who desperately wanted to disappear. The identity erasure, in this view, was just her personal desire for utter anonymity in her final moments.
But as we've discussed, the evidence really stacks up against that, doesn't it?
Heavily. We can pretty much dismiss this as a weak explanation when you look at the totality of the evidence. The forensics just don't align. The complex staging, the placed jewelry, the fact she inhaled s'more suggesting the fire was started very quickly after or even before the tills took full effect, and especially the deliberate, brutal sanding of her fingerprints.
Yeah, the fingerprints.
That level of meticulous, painful effort makes the interpretation of a simple, desperate act by an ordinary person in emotional distress seem, well, frankly, impossible. It points towards professional planning or significant outside influence.
Okay, theory 2 suggested she might have been a criminal courier. Not espionage, but maybe part of an international smuggling network. Trafficking high-value narcotics, maybe weapons, perhaps restricted technology across European borders.
In this view, the codes in the notebook weren't spy communications, but maybe ledgers or transaction logs, and her demise was potentially a brutal message or a punishment from within that criminal underworld.
That old water?
Well, the brutality certainly fits some criminal elements, but the sheer sophistication of the operation, the 8 separate, convincing passports, the geographical reach documented in the notebook, the level of operational security, the trade craft, it really stretches the credibility of a typical criminal organization in the 1970s. Few criminal groups back then possessed the resources or the state-level ability to manage that kind of complex identity infrastructure and employ that level of discipline.
Which brings us back to theory 3, the intelligence operative. This remains the most coherent, the most supported hypothesis, especially given the Cold War context we discussed. She was a professional agent, somehow compromised while on a sensitive mission near Bergen.
Exactly. And if she was an operative, her elimination could serve multiple purposes, as we touched on. She could have been taken out by an opposing agency that discovered her surveillance mission, maybe protecting their own assets near Bergen, or, the more chilling possibility, eliminated by her own organization. A desperate measure, perhaps, to ensure she couldn't talk if captured, or even just to ensure her demise could never be definitively traced back to her country of origin or her handlers.
That scenario aligns perfectly with the total identity erasure and the deliberate, confusing staging of her passing.
It fits all the known facts much better than the other theories, yes.
Decades passed with essentially no progress. The mystery just sat there. Until 2017, when Norwegian authorities made that pivotal decision. Exhume her remains. Apply modern forensic science. This was the big test for that zinc-lined coffin.
It was. The initial goal was straightforward, finally get an identification. But the results were complex, a mixture of real progress, but also continued frustration. DNA analysis was successful. It confirmed she was of European descent, as suspected. The mitochondrial DNA, which traces the maternal line, suggested a lineage most likely pointing towards Central Europe, specifically regions near the border between France and Germany.
Okay, so narrowing it down geographically. But the real innovation came from isotope analysis performed on her teeth. Can you explain that process? Because this gave the first solid clue about her life before all the espionage.
Right. Isotope analysis is a fascinating forensic technique. It analyzes stable isotopes, variations of elements like oxygen, carbon, strontium that get absorbed into our teeth and bones, even hair, primarily through the drinking water and food we consume during our early childhood development. Because the geological composition of water and soil varies significantly from region to region, the specific isotopic signature found in her teeth acts like a kind of geographic roadmap, indicating where she likely grew up.
And what did that roadmap reveal for the Isdal Woman?
The analysis confirmed definitively she was not Scandinavian. The strontium ratios strongly suggested she spent her formative years, infancy, through her teenage years somewhere in Central or possibly Eastern Europe, maybe near the Alps, or perhaps the Balkans.
Which fits the Cold War context.
It fits perfectly with the regions from which many Cold War operations involving agents moving between East and West originated. It also suggested she might have lived in various regions throughout her life, which, again, aligns with a potential childhood spent moving between different locations, maybe safe houses or training camps.
But despite these incredible leaps in technology, DNA providing lineage, isotopes providing early geography, the legacy of her plan for anonymity, or the plan imposed upon her, proved ultimately effective, didn't it?
It did. The analyses narrowed the possibilities significantly, but they did not provide a specific name. They couldn't pinpoint one town, one family.
So she was reburied.
She was reburied in the same zinc-lined coffin back in Bergen's Mullendal Cemetery. The marker still bears only that simple, stark inscription. An unknown woman who was found dead in Isdal in November 1970. She had, in effect, defeated even the best efforts of modern science to reclaim her past.
So we've analyzed the sources. And while the evidence, the tradecraft, those 8 aliases, the coded movements, the highly strategic location in Cold War Norway, points very heavily toward an operative caught in those geopolitical shadows. The truth of her name, her specific mission, her ultimate allegiance, it remains stubbornly hidden.
Yeah, what's really compelling here, I think, is that almost every piece of information we do have feels like it was either an intentional trap or a clue meticulously designed to mislead. The entire scene, the items left behind, the conflicting forensic evidence, it seems constructed to force investigators down blind alleys to pursue the wrong identity or the wrong motive. She, or perhaps the forces behind her demise, achieved their primary goal. Her true identity remains a complete zero on the international ledger, exactly as, presumably, they intended.
So let's leave our listeners with this thought. Consider the motivation behind not just ending a life, but meticulously, systematically erasing every single trace of its existence. Standing away fingerprints, cutting out every clothing tag, destroying documents, creating multiple false identities. What kind of secret is so powerful, so volatile, that it requires not just silence, but total oblivion for the person who carried it, presumably for the sake of protecting a larger network or operation? And it makes you wonder, what other Cold War secrets, or indeed the lives of other anonymous operatives like the Isdal Woman, are still buried out there, perhaps in quiet corners of Europe, just waiting for the next leap in technology, or maybe just sheer luck, to finally uncover them?